The abduction of Jodi Huisentruit has always scared me. I used to work as a morning anchor in a small Midwestern news market, just like she did.
I am Jodi Huisentruit for UTBS News. A record 31 mining and exploration.
Back in 1995, Jodi Huisentruit was working as the morning news anchor in Mason City, Iowa. And in the early morning hours, she disappeared on her way to work. The clues left behind were sparse, but implied that there was a struggle that morning. A handprint on her 1991 Mazda Miata, Jodi's personal items scattered all across the parking lot in front of her apartment complex. And 30 years later, we're still asking what happened to Jodi Huisentruit. Hey guys, I'm Kendra, and welcome to True Crime Commute, where we cover different true crime stories every Friday that are perfect for your drive to school, work, or wherever you're headed. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. Jodi grew up in Minnesota, and she knew from a young age she wanted to pursue being on TV and reporting the news. So she graduated from St. Cloud State University with a degree in mass communications.
Her drive and skill and talent and ability to become a good broadcast news anchor. Perhaps her having been on the track to that goal may have cost her her life.
She then went to go work for KGN as an intern, and within 6 months, she was in their bureau office appearing on air. From there, Jodi gets a job offer to be the morning news anchor in Mason City, Iowa, at their station KIMT. Mason City is a farming community, and back in the 1990s, it had a population of under 30,000 people. Since Jodi was the morning anchor, she would arrive at the station around 3 a.m. to produce the daily show and then go on to present it on air at the 6 a.m. time slot. So the parking at Jodi's apartment complex was all outside. They didn't have any kind of parking garage or structure. And when she'd leave for work, it would still be dark outside. The other thing to pay attention to here is her apartment complex butted right up to a wooded park. On June 27, 1995, the KIMT news producer, Amy, she calls Jodi and she speaks to her around 4 a.m.
It was just a regular routine phone call. I called her at 10 after 4. I said, Jodi, are you awake? You coming into work? She goes, what time is it? You know, the typical questions.
Now, Jodi tells her that she overslept and she'll be at the station right away. This was a fair assumption because Jodi lived 5 minutes from the news station. This producer is the last person to talk to Jodi. Jodi never shows up at the news station, and the producer ends up anchoring the daybreak show by herself. She then realizes Jodi's not there and calls the police around 7 a.m. The Mason City police arrive at Jodi's apartment complex. In her second-floor apartment, there were no signs of a struggle, but outside the building in the parking lot, it was a different story. Police believe that Jodi was unlocking the door to her 1991 Mazda when she was grabbed and taken. She fought for her life, and there was evidence of this all over the parking lot that there was a struggle. The driver's side mirror was bent forward, the key to the car was bent, her hairspray, jewelry, high heels, blow dryer covered the parking lot. Detectives also pulled a handprint from her Mazda. This handprint was located right behind the driver's door. Whoever it was that took her, they knew her schedule, they knew where she lived, because remember, this was the morning that she was running late, she had overslept. The day after she vanished, Mason City starts an in-depth search of city limits. And within hours, the Iowa State Police were brought in, and within days, the FBI. The search for Jodi becomes the largest manhunt in Iowa's history. Investigators have suggested that this abduction was done by somebody who knew her. So what happened to Jodi?
Because I don't want word to get out. I've got some tragic news to tell you. Here's what I found out.
Before we go into theories, I wanted to share some of my research that I found eerie and foreshadowing of the disappearance. After getting the job in Mason City, Jodi began to realize she was being followed by what she thought might be an obsessive viewer.
She said somebody had drove by and stared at her awful hard, and it made her nervous.
She reported to the Mason City police that a suspicious van was following her on her way to work. After getting this report, the Mason City Police Department gave Jodi police escorts to the news station for several weeks after. And during this time, officers did not see anything suspicious. In an eerie foreshadowing of events, Jodi and her morning producer, Amy, had discussions about their weird work schedules. And if anything ever happened, no one would ever know since it was dark and everyone would be sleeping. Let's go through the different theories. Theory number 1, John Vancise. The night before she disappeared, Jodi was over at her friend's house, John Vancise. He wanted to show her a home video that he had made of her 27th birthday. John is the last person to see Jodi alive. John was 20 years her senior and known to have a crush on Jodi. He even named his boat after the news anchor. The two regularly spent time together, going out on the boat and going on a water skiing trip.
That's Jodi. You can't help but love the woman. You just can't help but love her.
My mom said, well, you better be careful because, he might be getting romantically interested in you. Oh, we're just good friends, Jodi would say. After it all happened, we know that he was quite obsessed with Jodi.
In 2017, a search warrant was executed against Vancise, seeking GPS data for 2 of his vehicles. Vancise was subpoenaed to testify and provide fingerprints and palm prints to the grand jury. This proceeding was private, so we don't know the outcome, but it's safe to assume that he was not indicted. And in 2019, Vancise issued a statement stating that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The next theory is the 2 convicted sex offenders who lived near the news station. Thomas Skorskaden was a convicted sex offender. He was interviewed by law enforcement several months after Jodi's disappearance. Skorskaden did drive a van, and at the time of Jodi's disappearance in 1995, he was living out of it. And he would regularly drive up to Mason City for work. Years later, in the early 2000s, he'll reappear in her case investigation when he's bragging in prison about being investigated in a high-profile case. So because of all this, police decided to do a lie detector test on him. And after the results come back, they decide to move on. The other sex offender, Tony DeJuan Jackson, was investigated by police after a prison informant said he had confessed to murdering Jodi and wrote a rap song about the crime. Police investigated and later ruled out his involvement in 1999. Theory number 3. In the weeks before she disappeared, Jodi had a fling with a mysterious man. This man met with the police 3 different times, and law enforcement ruled him out as a suspect. In fact, private investigator Steve Ridge says that this crime was a crime of jealousy. Maybe somebody saw Jodi and her new mystery man, it made them upset, and then they decided to act out. In 2022, the FindJodi journalists were able to locate Jodi's Mazda 2-seater convertible. The car was one of the few pieces of evidence at the crime scene. Jodi had just purchased this car 3 weeks prior to her disappearance. Police towed the vehicle away, and 2 decades later, the journalists at FindJodi were able to locate her Mazda 2-seater convertible in Wisconsin. However, due to the time lapse, it's highly unlikely this vehicle will have forensic value. If you have any information on the Jodi Huisentruit case, make sure you submit a tip here at this website or call the Mason City Police Department at this number. Thank you for watching True Crime Commute. I'm Kendra Sommer, and if you have any story suggestions, feel free to send us an email here. Look forward to seeing you next Friday.